Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll be waiting a few minutes before starting so that everyone can join. So just like 4 more minutes and then we start.
Do you got a list of questions you're ready to shoot? Oh.
So there is a poll that you can answer. We'll use it and orient the discussion based on it.
Happy to have everyone here. We're seeing that people are joining. There's now 64 attendees. Hopefully it reaches like 1,000. Well, we shall see.
And some answers in the poll, so that's also nice.
That's good. That's good. There's also, I guess, the sections for the Q&A. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next time, Tom, I know we haven't done this, we're not finished yet, but next time we'll do it in person. It'll be awesome as well.
It'll be great. Despite how many times we've been how long we've been working together, Melissa, we still have not met in person, which is kind of wild. So.
I know. You never crossed the ocean to this side. Good, you're saving emissions.
Keeping an eye on that emission. Exactly. Yeah, that's
it's
right.
Good. It's good. Yeah. But we'll meet likely in London though next time.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Awesome. 74 people.
Yeah. Let's wait like 1 more minute and then we'll start. I see the count is still increasing, so people are just a bit late.
I bet a lot of people will say it's because it's Teams and I'm not used to it, right? I get the same issue with Zoom though.
The Zoom and Google Meet people. All right, shall we start? Yes, perfect. Let's start. So good morning, everyone. Maybe good afternoon also for some of you on the other side of the ocean. So my name is Antoine. I've joined GECA just 3 months ago as commercial director, and I'm very happy to be here with you today for, well, my first webinar, obviously. I think also the first webinar between GECA and GECA. So today we have the absolute pleasure to have Tom, co-founder and CPO at GECA, and Melissa, co-founder and carbon director at GECA. As you might have seen, we are going to discuss the most important risks that we see in biochar project development, and also share some solutions or like discuss these risks and how to mitigate them. So the agenda of today, short introduction by Tom and Melissa about themselves and about GECA and GECA. Then we'll present you an overview of the different risks of biochar projects. And then Melissa and Tom will discuss these risks together. You'll have the option to vote for the most important risks that you see and that you want to discuss. And so after that, we'll have a Q&A. Please share your question in the Q&A section of the Teams. There is separate section for it. So we'll answer these questions. So I think that's it. Enough of me talking. Let's get started. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antoine. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you all today. As some of you will have heard Melissa and I commenting, despite how long GECA and GECA have been working together, Melissa and I have not actually met in person. So hopefully the next one of these really will be in person. Something to look forward to for both of us, I hope. For those of you who joined late, missed Antoine's lovely introduction, my name's Tom Merriman. I'm one of the co-founders here at GECA. GECA, as many of you will know, is a specialist carbon insurer. So we look specifically at carbon removal and some avoidance projects, and we help provide risk transfer, risk management services around the carbon markets in general. We were founded a little over, or coming up to 3 years ago, and our goal at the time of founding, and it remains today, is to bring risk transfer, i.e. insurance, to the carbon removal industry to help it scale. Our thesis when we started this was that without risk transfer, the industry would not be able to scale to the size we all need it to. No other industry of a comparable scale operates without risk transfer, particularly in the form of insurance. And what we have found since then is that insurance can play a critical role in the carbon markets, particularly for unlocking institutional capital. We operate through the Lloyd's market, which is the largest specialty insurance market in the world. Specialty in insurance terminology tends to mean different things, but let's be clear that insuring biochar is still a rather specialist occupation, but a fascinating one at the same time. Our focus for GECA was, as I said, on carbon insurance, but specifically we have extended on a sort of standard or methodology by methodology basis, focusing initially on afforestation and nature-based projects, which still make up a large percentage of the insurance that we bind. But we've also extended into other technologies as well. So biochar was the first of those. We subsequently complemented that with enhanced rock weathering. We've got work going on close to conclusion to deliver DAC, BECS and CCS cover, as well as other types of tech removal forthcoming this year, which we're very excited about. Biochar in particular, as we'll go through on the rest of this call, presents some very interesting risks. I don't think necessarily they're anything particularly new. It just takes a little bit of understanding. And we've had the opportunity, the pleasure of having seen a lot of biochar projects so far and performing underwriting and which is sort of due diligence, if you like, for these projects. It's great to see how many in the pipeline. We need a lot of fantastic biochar projects. At the same time, it's been great to see how that biochar market has developed over just the short period of time in which GECA has been engaged in it. And I'm sure we'll cover some of those issues today. My role here at GECA is on the underwriting team, but also leading that expansion into different types of carbon removal technology cover. Which I mentioned before, started in nature-based and is now extended into the more tech-based approach. I will pause at that point and hand over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Tom, and for also setting the table about, biochar in general and, the risk associated to it not being necessarily new, just having to wrap our heads around it. So I see many people that we are quite familiar with in the audience, so happy to have you here. For those who don't know me or GECA, I'll introduce myself quickly. I'm a fan of short and sweet, so bear with me. I'm Melissa. I've been at GECA for over 6 years now, and for that period of time, we've worked on biochar projects. We are a global expert in carbon valorization through I would say thermochemical processes. So we work with developers to understand how to basically make profit and impact from waste. And part of the commercialization of the product is in the carbon market. So I've been working since the inception of the carbon market in biochar with the standards and also with GECA when you guys joined as well to help develop projects, but also to help educate around biochar and the specificities about biochar. So in general, our team has very technical knowledge where we will help really developers develop projects. So we're looking into technology and OEM feedstocks, as well as making a project profitable. So thinking about business model, thinking about product development and markets. And I mean physical product development and markets. And on the other side, we also work quite a lot in the carbon space where we help the same developers develop the carbon projects and market those credits out to the market. Marketing those credits obviously comes with some potential risk mitigation strategies, such as insurance, which we have explored quite a bit, and happy to talk more about the opportunities on this webinar with Tom. So did I miss anything? Or is that okay? Yeah, okay, short and sweet. So I guess it is my turn as well to give the base in terms of what we wanted to discuss today. It seems that I cannot see what is being shared. Is that possible? Ah, there we go. Thank you. So some of you that may have attended other presentation that the GECA team has given may be familiar with this wheel of risk, as we call it in the biochar space. There are several, risks, just like any project that is under development in the space. So I'll start with some, and we'll go through all of them. The purpose of this webinar is really to focus on 5 of those, which we have identified as probably the riskiest and those that are most likely to be, let's say, looked into by the GECA team. So the first one would be OEM and technology. What are the risks associated with biochar production? In this specific case, choosing a system is a core piece of any project. It will determine CapEx, but it will also determine what type of biochar you will be making, what type of markets you're able to achieve, and therefore the revenues from it. So it's a really critical element, and also one that if there is a problem with it, if the machine doesn't work, can cost quite a lot. So we know that some insurance providers, some capital providers also look quite a lot at the OEM technology, which is why it is in this brown color, maroon color, I think I could call it, with the other circles on there that are in the brown color, which are the ones we're going to be discussing today. Now, the second piece of a project risk is financing. Obviously, there are different types of financing, but this is a huge risk that we've identified in biochar because there is, somewhat of a lack in financing, and the financing that is available can come with either, some high costs, and there can be risk related to actually being able to achieve it on time with the desired conditions. Now, the third, it would be the team risk. Now, that's very common. Any project, any company in which anyone will invest or want to underwrite, in this case, you have to look at the team. It's a core element to determine, is the plan, first of all, good because the team has experience, but also how can we execute upon it? The fourth risk here is operations. This is also a major risk in biochar, one that probably, if the team agrees, we can go in a full session just on the operations risk of running a pyrolysis or a gasification or biochar producing plants, handling, maintenance, storage, etc. There are quite some operational risks that come into there. Fifth risk is carbon offtake. And that is separate than if you see at the extreme opposite biochar offtake. One is for the physical product and the other one is for the intangible product. Those two are generally required to have a project really be successful and get underway and also attract capital and be able to secure financing. So these two are, I would say, quite important to tackle early on, as early as possible, let's say. Next, we have the carbon standard, which is another risk that we'd like to talk about today, because it can be forgotten, but choosing the right standard is a critical piece. It can lead to, having smoother sailing, or on the opposite, it can lead to having potential issues in the future, or not aligning necessarily with exactly, the vision of the project. Standards do change, and for example, geography matters when we're choosing one. The next risk would be permitting, anything regulatory, right? Permits, authorities, regulatory, and we can even actually put into this risk, let's call it community engagement, social acceptance, which are critical to ensuring the proper build and ongoing operations in a respectful manner, whether it's the environment or the community around there. Next risk is construction commissioning. And I'm realizing now maybe we should have put those in order of the development of a project, but in any case, it's here. So construction and commissioning really relates to when we're building the facility, right? What are the risks associated with building it? Not necessarily operating it, not selecting it, but the construction itself. And finally, the feedstock supply, which is the last risk that we'd like to discuss during this webinar, is also a key component, one, to ensure that we don't lack any feedstock, that we have what we need over the course of the project to satisfy all our obligations and our targets, but also that it is of the right quality to what we are expecting, again, to be able to execute appropriately. So I believe there may be a poll in the chat that is asking you, among the 5 risks that we have highlighted, which one would you consider your biggest concern? The reason why we're asking this is because Tom and I can then orient the discussion around those that you find would be most helpful to talk about, right? And I guess with that, we can stop the screen and just start with our discussion, Tom and I. Awesome. So I saw your face, Tom. I don't know if everyone could see your face during that little presentation of the risks, but I'm sure you do have a question. You do have some doubts or some question about something I said. I would love to hear more about it. Oh, you're muted.
So ask all my best questions when I'm on mute. A lot of the inquiries we get, which is a reflection, I think, on the industry, and I mentioned this a little bit in the introduction, is around the very early stage projects. And a lot of the challenges they face, and Melissa, you and I have discussed this before, is around that initial period of getting the project off the ground. I mean, quite literally in some cases, of the construction risk, the commissioning risk, and so forth. We've said that, not unlike sort of house renovations, whatever time you're estimating, double it. I think that was your line actually, which I rather like.
Yeah.
And of course, we see a lot of projects cross our desk, and many of them very promising, but it does take a long time to get these up and running. And part of that is the sort of relative immaturity of the industry, but I think not necessarily of the technology itself in many cases, but it's because it's at the intersection of relatively well-known technology, but the carbon markets and the standards and all the other bits that make this so wonderfully interesting, but also relatively complex at times. So I guess my question to you is, in your experience in the projects you've seen, what have been some of the major obstacles that operators or potential operators have encountered during that construction and commissioning phase?
Yeah, I will say that this is one of the most underestimated piece of risk there is out there. And it has, how can I say this? It's not on anyone's plate particularly. It's just a matter of whenever there's a new facility being commissioned, whether that's a biochar facility or any other type of manufacturing plant, there is always something happening. And so when the system is going to be built, when all of the engineering is going to be done and we're going to start running, first thing we're going to do is run in a cold manner. We're just going to get the moving pieces to move and see how that goes. Or we don't have any feedstock in there. We don't have any heat in there. There are likely some things that can break. Maybe, it's a fan that is not appropriate in size, or the model changed compared to the last time that it was used. In some cases, the pieces are not necessarily well connected, or the electricity, there's a missing piece on the electrical part. Once we get through that, the cold running phase, we have to get to the hot running phase, again, somewhat empty. And then we start to see, well, are there any pieces that are not actually spec'd to run at this heat, at a low heat at least? And that can happen in biochar. And this can happen in any type of system, low tech, high tech, super sophisticated, less sophisticated. Obviously, the manufacturers of equipment that have the most experience generally tend to mitigate that risk. But in any case, the answer to a technology is never, well, not never, but there's no one answer to a technology, right? It's always about the targets, the constraints, the goals. So when it comes down to construction and commissioning, generally on a first piece of equipment that is getting installed by a certain specific team, so I'm not talking about expansion, we would expect commissioning to take 6 months. And I know some
Melissa,
people are gonna. Yeah.
Is that including the period where, let's say, the civils are being done, laying the concrete pad, putting up the sheds, in putting the utilities in? That's separate. And then I suppose as well, in addition to that, there's the permitting process too, which is also sort of challenging. So those two parts of the project sit around this sort of commissioning risk, right?
Yes. So the permitting is generally done much earlier, because generally we need an operating permit, but we also need construction permits and et cetera. So those are done relatively early in a project once the site is secure and the financing is there. And then we also have to wait for the machine, waiting for the technology to actually come. Generally, it's not built in our backyard. In some cases that can happen in the sense that the manufacturer is located near us. But in most cases, there is some, build timelines, shipping timelines, and the civil and the groundwork is, before we're actually setting up this machine. So the commissioning really talks about, you have the machine, it's assembled, we start running it, finding all the bugs, clearing out the bugs, and scaling up to at least having the first, commercial operations. How do you at GECA evaluate the commissioning risk?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point. I mean, one of the reasons I asked it is because, as I said, we get a lot of questions around that early stage. Construction risk and insurance for construction risk is a very well established market, and there are plenty of insurers out there who'll cover that regardless of the underlying project type. Where we step in is at the point at which a construction project has ceased to be construction, has moved towards or moving towards the operation stage. So that sits somewhere in that commissioning phase. What we typically do is, and this is common across the insurance industry, particularly in the physical damage, so property insurance on, let's say something like energy markets, so perhaps oil and gas, is to use a pretty standard testing and commissioning clause. What that really looks like is a questionnaire, and it asks the operator to attest that certain, maintenance has been done, that certain sort of processes have been followed in order to bring the machine up to a point at which it's ready to get started. Yeah. Part of that, from an insurer's perspective, is to, one, see some of the data that's been provided so far in terms of running data, in terms of how the machine's running and so forth. That's especially important in biochar, especially when it comes to sort of lab results and so forth. But also is to then look at running the machine for a period of time close to its maximum capacity, so that we can see that actually, yes, despite all the commissioning that's been done, we have got to a process where we've got a machine that can maintain operations for what we think is a just past the sort of realistic of what it would do in real life. So there's a real when you look through the language there, it really does talk about this kind of handover between someone who's done the commissioning and the construction, and then we're now handing these assets over into an operations phase. I suspect for a lot of the folks who've joined this webinar who had experience in other industrial processes, this will be a very familiar part. And I suppose that goes back to what we were saying previously about, yes, there are some new and interesting risks with biochar, but ultimately this is an industrial process, which, just like other, light, medium, heavy industrial processes have been done 1,001 times. We can learn from that, and we can apply what's unique or let's say idiosyncratic, I suppose, for the biochar stage. So that's really where we see that early stage risk. It is, as I said before, encouraging that so many projects are out there at that early stage. It is challenging for us to get involved much before that from a risk transfer perspective, but much like yourselves, the earlier we can get involved and see how the projects come together, the easier it is for us to give what we might consider to be simple advice, but what we hope for the operator will be quite crucial advice to say, well, if you do this, this, and this, it's going to be easier or cheaper to insure. And I suppose from your perspective, if you do these, take these simple steps, or perhaps not so simple steps, you're going to get a more consistent operation, lower downtime for maintenance, fewer unexpected outages, etc. So it's certainly crucial, important, I would say, for us to get involved at an early stage.
What would be, therefore, some example of those tips that you could give to the audience regarding, making it smoother for you? Are there any specifics that you can give out?
Yeah, I mean, some of them, get a little bit insurancy, but actually they sort of again, it's one of these things that I think they're easy advice to give, and actually they're really common sense. So one of the challenges is co-location. So clearly, when selecting a site for a biochar facility, trying to solve one of those interesting problems of, well, I want to make sure it's close enough to the supply of feedstock. I've got to have, relatively good transport. I've got to have people who know what they're doing close by. Perhaps if it's a big facility, I need to be relatively close to an industrial centre if I need sort of spares and maintenance and so forth. But then, of course, I've got an output. I've got physical biochar which needs to be delivered somewhere. And if that's in bulk, I've got to consider what my transport options are. And what's especially interesting with biochar, as we all know, of course, and this is one of the sort of the idiosyncrasies of the carbon markets in general, is we always have to keep an eye on our LCA. Right, so that's not something you have to worry about elsewhere. It's just about cost, but here we've got to consider that too. So that's an interesting challenge. What happens sometimes, of course, for the feedstock is you say, well, there's this paper mill over here, or there's this sawmill, and what a fantastic supply of feedstock they have. They just chuck it over the fence and away we go. But of course, from a risk perspective, we're a bit more concerned about if you co-locate with one of these facilities which don't always have the best record in terms of fires, then what additional risk are you putting in here by putting a high temperature processing plant, in the grounds, so appropriate kind of risk management in terms of siting of the plant and consideration of co-location is one of these, I think sort of a good example of something quite simple. And then actually something perhaps even more straightforward is just doing a risk assessment and thinking then about what risk management would look like after that. And this is something I'm sure, Melissa, that you talk to your clients about. Risk management is not just making sure that there's a fire suppression system if that's appropriate, but it's about doing good maintenance, it's about doing good cleaning, it's about making sure that the plant is doing everything it can with relatively low cost techniques to ensure it can operate at its sort of peak efficiency. I don't think that's anything particularly new to the people on the call necessarily. I'm sure they're all very experienced, but these are the sort of, sometimes these can be missed. I think seeing a good risk management plan is a big plus from our perspective when we underwrite.
That is super helpful. And that's definitely something we do help a lot of clients that we work with. You mentioned something, and I'm going to change subject so that we get to cover some other ones. But you mentioned to always keep an eye on the LCA.
Yes.
we always have to do that. And I guess there was a question that was sent over to us in the registration form asking about the basically numbers or ways of doing an LCA and the number of methodologies related to LCA. In general, the first thing to know about LCAs is that we should respect the ISO 14. I can't remember the specific number. There are many, but we should always respect those rules. And then in the LCA, what we do at GECA and what we've done with several clients, the LCA is a tool to actually get better. So where we find inefficiencies through LCA work, we're able to act on it. Generally, that's operations, whether it's we're using too much fuel for for startups when we could actually potentially reduce and have the same temperature in the reactor with half of that. Or it could be, let's not transport it on the other side a mile away and then bring it back when we need it, right? So when you insure a project, or when you underwrite a project, I should say, but also insure, do you look closely at the LCAs and the efficiencies in there?
Yes, we do actually. And again, I think this is one of those risks that we think is, special, idiosyncratic, however you want to describe it, to, well, actually not just biochar, but actually really the whole sort of carbon removal space. One of the sort of common examples I like to give is when we've been looking at DAC plants. Now, I know that's not biochar, but forgive me a minute, I'll return. But, in that spot, they're very sensitive to the cost and availability of low carbon electricity, or perhaps even zero carbon. But of course, the challenge with renewables is they're not always available. And of course, there can be some natural catastrophe event, hailstorms and so forth, that might knock out a solar facility. Regardless of the damage that causes, and of course, there's insurance for that kind of stuff, the DAC plant might then end up having a slightly different emissions profile than it was expecting, because it's ended up having to switch from using more renewables to more natural gas. And I think if we think about biochar plants within the LCA, what we're looking for are areas of the LCA which are quite sensitive to change. Now, in many cases, it doesn't make too much of a difference, but there are some that we're quite acutely aware of. And of course, as with everything, transport is a big deal. If your diesel trucks, and mostly, let's face it, at the moment it is diesel trucks, are bringing in the feedstock, and they have to take giant detour because some landslide closed the short route and now it's 50 miles longer, well, your emissions profile is going to increase. You're going to deliver less credits at some point because you'll be rated lower. So, we would, because we provide an all risks policy, that is, whatever happens, if you under deliver, we cover it. We're keen to keep an eye on the sensitivity of the LCA to changes. What we usually see, therefore, is in good risk management plans is, well, what's the backup? I've got one feedstock supplier. What happens if it goes wrong? What happens if again that road access is blocked? Can I get it from elsewhere? All that sort of thing. So I think it's that sort of firstly there's the risk analysis, and then and then it sort of transforms into risk management. That's probably a bit of a niche example, but we are very interested in the LCA. I'd say maybe from your point, Melissa, I mean, when you look at and you help clients with LCAs, what are the areas that you help them with that present the most challenges in terms of, one, identifying the emissions, but then two, putting in measures to ensure that the operator is able to stick to that LCA?
So I think you mentioned two really important things here. I would say the first piece that's generally a big part of any sensitivity analysis that we run on these projects is electricity. Because even though the plants are thermically autosufficient, they still consume electricity to move the fans. They still consume electricity for the HMI and the PID and stuff. And we see that in different jurisdictions, we have major electricity impacts. I mean, even more so to when it is a reactor that works on electricity. It can make or break an LCA, if I can say, facility, and with that, obviously, the business model and the expected revenues. So I would say this is something that we look closely to. Obviously, the transport is always something important, but when it comes down to the and I know we said we weren't really going to be talking about operations, but they're so integrated into everything. So I'll mention some things here. It's not necessarily that the operators don't stick to the LCA, because the LCA is not their guideline, is that when the operators don't have the SOPs to know exactly how and what to measure at which time, in order to be able to use the most, the realist and the most precise data in an LCA, this is also when we find that, you know, we're losing. The project may be losing because we have to make conservative assumptions. So we take quite a big look at the electricity. So if you are in the middle of coal country, for example, there might be an analysis, and this depends on the standards. Not all standards allow this, but there may be an opportunity to actually source renewable energy, and you have to do the math, right? What is actually my revenue from the reduction in the emissions from the electricity versus my spend in RECs? But that's an option that we look into. It can get quite complicated in terms of LCA, but it's good to know it exists. So yeah, and I guess I'm going to switch to financing, because I think some people in the chat also mentioned financing, and it's always something that we kind of hit bumps in the road with. You said you have a lot of projects that get to you pretty early. There are a lot of projects that also get to us pretty early. And a lot of the projects come to us at a stage where there is an idea in place. There are some steps that have been done. For example, maybe they already have a site. Maybe they have a system in mind, but the financing always kind of seems to be a barrier. There is a critical lack of, I would say, even patient and accepting capital for this type of project. So I guess on a risk and on a insurance perspective, what do you see on your side in terms of the ways that projects can accelerate their access to financing, and how does GECA, if you guys do, participate in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There is a very tricky funding gap that I think persists at the moment, and I don't know whether it's something that will dissipate over time, or whether it's become perhaps even more kind of acute more recently. But I think it's that very early stage of getting the project off the ground. To some extent, once the project has advanced a little, and it can sort of demonstrate perhaps either that physically the plant is there, or perhaps even have made some deliveries, then it gets a little easier to find finance. But of course, it's then a catch-22. How do you get to that point if you can't find the finance? I mean, I can't tell you that insurance is the magic bullet which solves this, because as we discussed earlier, you know, we can't take construction risk. We don't provide that type of insurance. So we typically come on at the point when it's operating. With that said, one of the ways that we can give confidence to early stage investors, or those who are perhaps making quite early stage prepayments, is twofold. One is we can conduct underwriting such that we produce a risk assessment of the project. And perhaps unlike some of the other risk assessments out there, we're specifically commenting on the insurability of the project and covering a lot of the areas that you've pointed out, Melissa, with that very nice diagram assessing the risks. So we'll go through and we'll try and assess the risks, and it's almost a way of sort of giving feedback on how well the projects have been put together. But what we hope is that, and where we've actually seen good feedback here, is that for investors, they will look through that report, they will see that an insurer who is a regulated entity with underwriting models which have to be approved by a whole capacity panel of actuaries has given some comment, and in many cases quite detailed feedback on the project. If I'm at a investor and I have to go to my investment committee and say I'd like to put $1 million down up front into this project to help them get off the ground, having that third-party report is sometimes helpful, especially from a financial institution such as GECA, to get them over the line. The other way in which we can help is to say, well, look, we can't cover your deliveries yet because we just don't know the operating characteristics of the machine in the real world, not necessarily what it's been rated as on the nameplate. But what we can say is, well, perhaps we could just look at some abandonment and insolvency cover, which is to say, you're an operator there. If you were to abandon this project or go insolvent in the period between now and a delivery, then we could potentially look at providing some cover there. So it's not full delivery cover. We're not showing the machine breaks down. It's just if you get abandoned or become insolvent. Which, to be fair, I mean, if you haven't got the machine actually commissioned, it's not going to break down, right? So we're not going to cover that. Why would you seek cover for that risk? So there's sort of two ways in which we can help there. One of the benefits of working through Lloyd's, and again, this gets a little bit insurancy, is that our insurance is rated as AA- by S&P, right? Which is better than some country, well, better than many countries' government bonds, right? So we're a relatively small insurance company. That's a real step up, I suppose, or benefit of being through the Lloyd's market. And I think that also, again, from an investment committee point of view, sometimes helps. When you get into the bigger deals where you're looking for bank financing, that credit risk becomes even more important because the banks and the financial institutions are then looking to lend and potentially get capital relief if they put credit insurance behind that. But that's probably getting a bit too financy and insurancy. I think specifically around biochar, we've got a risk assessment service. We've got this sort of abandonment insolvency, and then working closely with we can work closely with the operator and potentially the investor or pre-purchaser to try and make sure that project is ticking all the boxes when it comes to insurability, risk management, and so forth. So we can all stakeholders there can see a successful project make it to that operational stage, and then hopefully a nice, relatively smooth run through the operational stage.
So I guess I'm going to add one piece in terms of the financing to be really practical for the audience here. Generally, what we find that projects that do, generate financing or that are getting invested in, and that also applies to carbon offtakes. They have a site, they have a technology that they have vetted, they have also a feedstock supply, they have a place that they can put their biochar. And that's not just, I'm going to sell it out to, whoever wants to buy biochar. No, there is a contractual agreement, or you have access to land where you could put it for free, whether that's your own farm or land or the community around you. And that's a really, really key component. And we have people that have experience. So teams that have experience at building projects, especially in the industrial side, that understand how to handle construction, they understand how to handle permitting, they also understand the timelines. So those elements are absolutely key to generating the financing and to also generate the carbon offtake. I think for the audience, it's really important to understand this. Most carbon offtakers view their offtakes, especially when, we're talking about longer term offtakes, they view their offtakes almost just like an investment. So they ask for the same diligences, but they can even go further one notch, because your investors won't necessarily ask you, what's your plan to get certified? What's your plan to reduce your risk? Or do you have plans to insure, right, in terms of the carbon credits themselves? So view them as very picky investors, okay? And so you have to have a project that is almost shovel ready. It means that you have to spend some time. You have probably to also, hire some support behind you there. And so it's not necessarily as easy as many do think. And even when we do have a potential place to put the biochar, we need to make sure that this aligns with the terms of the feedstock, so that we have the feedstock aligning with the term also of the offtakes, both biochar and carbon. So in very practical manner, you should know that you need these things generally. It's possible not to have those and to yield some, but I would say really go for those. And in terms of the offtake themselves, a lot of people ask about biochar offtakes. Think about developing a product. When you think about developing a product rather than just selling biochar, when people don't really know about biochar, you're going to hit better potential leads for buying that. And that's going to accelerate your ability to deploy your project and to also get that carbon offtake. So, and I'm sure that will also help a lot with the underwriting. Talking about underwriting, I know we're getting into Q&A, but I do have one last question for you, Tom.
Yeah.
How many projects did you guys underwrite in Biochar?
So that's a good question. It's probably close to about 20 projects which we've completed underwriting on, to varying degrees. And then if we to include the stuff which we'd sort of call like pre-underwriting, where we just look through them and try and give a little bit of feedback, there's probably another 10 or 20 on top of that. So it's a good number. We like to think at the moment we see most deals that are out there in the market, and that's I'm not trying to blow our own trumpet, as they say, but I think that we're really trying to help in the biochar market. So the more deals we can see, the more sort of feedback we can give, the more educated we all become on this sort of risk management piece. So yeah, it's probably up there in the sort of 20 to 40 range.
Oh, that's a big range. That's 100%, but still over 20 is really good. And I guess there was one question before I pass it on, I think, to Antoine, but there was one question about where is GECA's insurance available?
Yeah, so that is a good question, actually. So GECA insurance available for projects pretty much worldwide, with the exception of sanctioned countries, although I suspect there'll be very few of those people dialing in today. The restriction we have is where the location of the insured is, and this is nothing particularly new. If you're seeking insurance and you're based in the UK, the US, Europe, Switzerland, Singapore, Canada, no problem. We can help you there, either directly or with the help of an insurance broker. Countries outside of that area who are seeking insurance, there are things we can do, but it's less straightforward. Insurance is and there are benefits to this, a regulated product. So we have to make sure that we're regulated in the country, in the jurisdiction that permits the selling of insurance. So sometimes that can be a bit restrictive, but like I say, hasn't in the case of biochar held us back too much.
All right.
Thank you so much, Tom and Melissa, for this discussion and these answers. I will ask a few additional questions that are from the chat. By the way, to the audience, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Don't be shy. Melissa, maybe one for you. So Victor is asking that 6 months for commissioning seems long, and that normally it should be less than 2 months. So what is the reason for this? Why is it so long? And yeah, how to make it shorter, because it results in a costly delay for a successful build.
Good to have you here, Victor. You are right. In some cases, it could be as short as 2 months. That generally, as I mentioned earlier, 6 months is for a new facility being built with a team that has not operated necessarily this type of system before. And so we've seen 6 months timelines. In some cases, this timeline is also due to some pieces of the equipment having broken or not being appropriate, and also having those timelines waiting to have a replacement. Okay. But while you don't have a replacement, you can't necessarily actually run either. So in the case of you guys, you have, I believe, several successful facilities. I would expect that your commissioning could be done in 2 to 3 months. In some cases, whether it's in new jurisdictions, different electrical components, anything more technical, it can extend a little. But I would say 6 months is really for new facilities, for new project developers that haven't been installing or running systems. So one way to mitigate this timeline is to deal with a OEM, a technology supplier that has experience and that has several systems that have already been functioning in the world. And I would say this, even, I just want to add just briefly, even changing feedstock compared to what the system is generally used to can yield also longer commissioning timelines. Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks, Melissa. I'll just add that yeah, this is a conversation I was actually having this morning with an operator, and I think what we're all hoping is that as both the technology improves, becomes more widespread, and the experience of using and the familiarity of building and seeing biochar plants expands, commissioning times, build times, everything else should come down. So it becomes a bit more of a standardized sort of light medium industrial size unit, which we're putting up in a particular place where the feedstock is good, permanently, semi-permanently, and away we go. So yeah, the more we can do this, the more familiarity there'll be, the quicker those commissioning and build times will be, and yeah, which is all good news for all stakeholders, I think.
Thank you, Tom. Another question, and I think that's a very interesting one for the entire audience. How do you gather enough project data to ensure insurance reliability? And another one that is maybe related: what role does AI play in this data gathering?
I'll hold on the AI question for a moment. Let me go through what sort of data are available for ensuring reliability of insurance. I mean, there's a standard amount of data that we need to underwrite projects. It looks quite similar to sort of getting financial DD done. Again, I think as Melissa said in the answer to the last question, if you've done a bunch of these plants already, or if we're familiar and have worked with you before, we can really reduce the amount of underwriting or reduce the data request because we've looked at it before and we're familiar with the producer, the obligor, if you like. Reliability of insurance is an interesting one. We will typically write biochar insurance for up to I think it's 4 years, maybe 5 years. The question then becomes, well, how do you renew it? Or maybe you just want to insure a particular contract that's a year long, but you think you've got a repeat customer. How do you get an insurer back again? I mean, I think there's two factors at play here. One is more insurers will enter the market to provide biochar insurance, which for people seeking insurance will mean more choice and better prices. Although I think our prices are already great, just in case. But obviously, competition should lead to that stuff, and that would hopefully address that reliability side. On the other hand, as an insurer, we, especially in carbon, we feel a particular responsibility to ensure good risks, which is to say what would be bad for the market is to see a whole bunch of big claims come in for biochar projects, because then the insurance market itself might then pull back and say, actually, we don't think this is a great area to provide insurance for. So we feel a sort of a degree of responsibility to try and chart a fairly reliable course so that the insurance market for biochar itself can continue to grow. That will be, I think there are two important steps there. One is just good underwriting, but two is also how we pay and service the first claims that are made. If the more experienced insurance people who are in the GECA team, who have been through insurance cycles before, will say, one of the really big tests for insurance is looking at how claims are paid. So it's an odd thing to say, but we're all quite looking forward to paying the first claim, and especially in biochar too. With respect to AI, clearly a hot topic. I will say that on our side, we do use, I'll still call it machine learning. I don't know what steps into AI. That's probably more of a question for our CTO, Paul. But we do use that stuff for various bits of the underwriting. What role can it play? I'm not really sure I'm qualified to answer. I can speculate, but I'd probably need a drink before I do that. So, Melissa, maybe you could speculate on our behalf.
Well, no, I don't like speculating, but maybe what we can do is, if Tobias, you want, Tom to check with his team, he can maybe get back to you. Sorry to put some work on your table, Tom.
Not at all. Not at all.
So
we're getting closer to the end. So maybe one last question that might also interest everyone in the audience. There are also some other specific questions. What I suggest is to answer them separately after this webinar. So one last question, maybe that's more one for you this time, Melissa, but Tom, feel free to intervene. So Josh is asking why biochar offtake were not a focus for this webinar, as this requires long-term permanence and it's not as simple as having a contract in place. So could you tell us more about this risk, biochar offtakes?
It's probably the largest risk in making a project successful. You're right, Josh. And the reason why it's not, to answer your question, the reason why it is not was not the main topic of this webinar is because I actually believe it requires 1 hour, 2 hour as a conversation in itself. And with that, if people in the audience can provide some insights, would you like us to actually dedicate 1 hour, 1 full hour, to this topic? This is something that we can work on and have a webinar only focused on this. But this is the main reason. So please support this and let us know if you do want us to go through it. In general, what I will say is that it's not as simple as generating an offtake, indeed, a contract in place, because that contract is really difficult to secure, which is why earlier I was mentioning it's really important to view biochar deployment and biochar in general as a product. Biochar is a class of materials. It's like plastics, but I won't go and sell the same plastic that makes, a single-use water bottle to also make a spatula because it's going to melt. The properties differ and the market that it can reach also therefore differ. And your ability to generate a contract there depends, of course, on your sales ability, but that's a given, but also on the ability that you have to communicate those properties and the impact of that product, okay, to your buyer. So someone that's selling biochar to the ag space, they can say, I'm selling biochar to the ag space. Awesome. Those are not the projects that we necessarily see succeed. Those that we do see succeed are the ones that are saying, I'm selling into the ag space, but specifically, I'm actually selling to, I don't know, like almond producers because they have some issues with droughts or with irrigation. And we know that our biochar with its specs is a good product to enhance water retention, right? That's the kind of product that you can actually go and sell out, not just yelling on roofs. We're selling biochar. In the same way, in the cement industry, it requires tremendous amounts of testing and time with cement and concrete companies, asphalt companies, to be able to get the properties that are required by these companies to actually put a product and use a product on the market. So it's not as simple as many people say, and you have to surround yourself with people who know what they're talking about, both in those specific markets, in those supply chains, and what it means to integrate your product as potentially an ingredient of a final product, right? So again, Josh, happy to talk about this offline. This is, in fact, a big part of what we do is we can help developers reach the right markets and understand the properties, because cement, like asphalt companies, they don't care about necessarily your nutrients in your char, whereas the farmer won't care about your polyzoic properties, whatever the name is, specifically in cement.
Yeah, and then I'll just add to that. I think, offtake, if you think about offtake specifically for the credits, I think it's a really interesting area. I'd be happy to join a webinar and give our sort of opinion on it. Even when we see and sort of move, adjacent to offsets of the pre-purchase and the investments, even or offset or offtakes where there is a degree of sort of deposit. There's a great deal of variability in those contracts. There's a number of law firms out there who are doing a great job of trying to standardize these contracts. We see, and I spent a lot of this week doing it, even for very experienced traders in this area who trade lots of different types of materials, that even their contracts still need a little bit of work here from a carbon perspective. Although we're, in some cases we're happy to help where we can. And then, of course, circling all of this is the permanence debate around biochar as well, which probably is a whole nother webinar in addition to offtake. So perhaps I'll stop at that stage.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Melissa, as well. I think it's time to wrap up and try to respect the timing that we have set. So It was a great discussion. Thank you so much. I think we have opened a lot of doors. We are happy to answer some of the remaining questions separately, and we'll definitely organize new webinars. We have a lot of topics to still cover. I would like to thank you, our speakers, Melissa and Tom. It was really a pleasure, and I think we can all realize that this industry has a lot of things to tackle, and there are always new things to learn. So it was great that you shared these insights. I would also like to thank GECA's and GECA's team, especially Rachel, Jana, and Ajar for the preparation and organization, and also thanking all the attendees of today. Two last points before leaving. Rachel shared a survey. If you could complete it, that would be great. Your feedback is really valuable to us. And also, both GECA and GECA will be present at the New York Climate Week next week. So if you're interested to meet in person, that would be our pleasure. I think that's it for us. Thank you very much again, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Melissa. Thanks, Antoine. Yep. Bye-bye.
Ciao.